The Sovereign's Codex, 28 Laws for Unseen Influence, Absolute Control, and Self-Mastery. Forward. The nature of the chessboard. The world is not governed by morality, fairness, or the inherent goodness of humanity. It is governed by leverage. Every interaction you have, from the boardroom to the bedroom, is a negotiation of power. Most people walk through life asleep, reacting emotionally to the stimuli around them. They are pieces on a chessboard, moved by forces they refuse to understand. They cling to ideals of how the world should be, and in doing so, they make themselves perennial victims of how the world actually is. To step outside of this cycle is to become a sovereign. A sovereign is not necessarily a king or CEO. Sovereignty is a state of psychological independence. It is the mastery of your own emotions and the deep, unflinching understanding of the emotions of others. The sovereign does not rely on brute force. Brute force is the weapon of the unimaginative. Instead, the sovereign uses the unseen forces of human psychology: vanity, fear, desire, and the desperate need for validation. The Sovereign's Codex is a manual for the architect of their own destiny. It is amoral, objective, and ruthlessly practical. Read it not to become a tyrant, but to ensure that a tyrant can never rule you. Part 1. The Architecture of the Self. Law 1. Conceal your true desires until the end. The judgment. If they know what you want, they know how to control you. Human beings are inherently transactional. The moment you reveal your ultimate goal, you arm your opponents with the exact price of your cooperation. Feign interest in the trivial to mask your pursuit of the vital. By the time your true intentions are revealed, it must be too late for anyone to stop you. Historical observance. In the 16th century, Tokugawa Ieyasu, one of the great unifiers of Japan, spent decades serving beneath lesser men. When his rival Toyotomi Hideyoshi took power, Ieyasu did not rebel. Instead, he feigned complete submission. He requested to be moved to the desolate, swampy Kanto region, a move that his rivals celebrated, believing he was exiling himself to irrelevance. In reality, the Kanto plain was far away from the prying eyes of the capital. Ieyasu spent years secretly building an unassailable economic and military base power in this swamp, which would later become Tokyo. Because he masked his desire for absolute rule behind a facade of humble obedience and geographic exile, no one stopped him. When Hideyoshi died, Ieyasu marched from his swamp with an overwhelming force and claimed the shogunate. Keys to sovereignty. Information asymmetry is the foundation of all power. When you sit at a poker table, you do not show your hand. Life is no different. People naturally project their own desires onto others. If you offer them a false trail, a decoy desire, they will eagerly follow it. If you want the promotion, complain loudly about how much you value your free time and hate corporate responsibility. Your rivals will dismiss you as a threat. Creating a smokescreen does not mean lying outright. It means being highly selective with your truth. Become a master of the decoy negotiation. Fight tooth and nail for a concession you do not actually care about. When you eventually surrender that point, your opponent will feel victorious and readily hand over the thing you truly desired all along. The reversal. There are rare moments when absolute transparency is a weapon. If you have overwhelming, unstoppable leverage, stating your intentions clearly can strike terror into your enemies and force immediate surrender. However, this is only viable when the power dynamic is absurdly in your favor. Otherwise, keep your desires locked in a vault. Law 2. Cultivate an aura of calculated unpredictability. The judgment. Predictability breeds contempt, complacency, and vulnerability. When others can predict your actions, they can build traps for you. By intentionally breaking your own patterns, you force others into a reactive state, exhausting their mental energy. An unpredictable person is an intimidating person. Historical observance. During the American Civil War, Confederate General Stonewall Jackson was terrifying to the Union Army, not just because of his tactical brilliance, but his absolute unpredictability. He would march his men in the dead of night through impossible terrain, appearing where he had no logistical right to be. He kept his own officers in the dark about his plans until the very last moment. Because no one, neither friend nor foe, could predict his next move, the Union Army spent vast resources defending against phantoms, paralyzed by the question, "What is Jackson doing?" Keys to sovereignty. Humans are pattern recognition machines. We feel safe when we can predict the behavior of our bosses, friends, and enemies. The moment a pattern breaks, it triggers primal anxiety. To wield this law, you must first establish a baseline. Be reliable, steady, and normal for a period. Then, without warning, do something completely out of character. If you are usually mild-mannered, lash out with terrifying, calculated anger over a minor infraction. If you are known as a hardliner, suddenly grant an incredibly generous concession. This psychological whiplash creates a sense of awe and fear. People will begin to constantly monitor your moods, trying to figure you out. The more time they spend thinking about you, the more power you hold over them. They will walk on eggshells, unconsciously elevating you to a position of authority. The reversal. Do not confuse unpredictability with chaos or unreliability. If you are constantly erratic, you will be deemed unstable and isolated. The unpredictability must be calculated, a sudden lightning strike in an otherwise clear sky. It is a tool of dominance, not a lifestyle of madness. Law 3. Trade in the currency of favors, not obligations. The judgment. Money is transactional and finite. Favors are emotional and infinite. When you pay someone, the relationship ends when the money changes hands. When you do someone a favor, you bind them to you with invisible threads of loyalty and guilt. Become the person who solves problems for others, and you will build a bank of loyalty that currency cannot buy. Historical observance. The Godfather, Don Vito Corleone, though he was a fictional archetype accurately reflecting historical mafia tactics, understood this law perfectly. The opening scene of the epic shows the undertaker, Bonacera, offering money for revenge. The Don refuses the money, insulted. He demands only friendship and that Bonacera might one day be called upon to return a service. By refusing cash, the Don converted a one-time transaction into a lifelong debt of absolute loyalty. When the Don eventually needed Bonacera to mask the bullet-riddled body of his son, Bonacera could not refuse. Keys to sovereignty. The most powerful favors are those that cost you little but mean everything to the recipient. An introduction to the right person, a subtle word of praise in the ear of a boss, the waiving of a bureaucratic rule. When you grant a favor, never explicitly state that they owe you. Let the societal pressure of reciprocity do the work for you. If you remind them of the debt, it becomes a transaction and they will resent you. Keep the favor hanging in the air, unspoken. Furthermore, be wary of accepting favors from others, especially those above you. A favor accepted is a collar around your neck. If you must accept, find a way to repay it quickly and disproportionately to sever the chain of obligation. The reversal. With sociopaths or deep narcissists, favors are wasted. They view your generosity as weakness and feel no obligation to repay it. In these rare cases, revert to strict contract-bound transactions. Law 4. Weaponize your flaws before others can exploit them. The judgment. Perfection is threatening. A person with no apparent flaws invites intense scrutiny. People will dig until they find the dirt. By openly admitting harmless, strategic flaws, you humanize yourself, disarm critics, and control the narrative of your own imperfections. Keys to sovereignty. In the court of public opinion, the cover-up is always worse than the crime. If you have a weakness that cannot be hidden, you must own it so completely that it becomes a signature trait. If you are short, make jokes about it before others can. If you have a vicious temper, publicly acknowledge it and frame it as passionate intensity that you are working on. By claiming the flaw, you deprive your enemies of the joy of exposing it. More importantly, use decoy flaws. Confess to being too trusting, or a perfectionist, or a bit lazy with paperwork. These are socially acceptable flaws that distract you from your true dangerous weaknesses, like ruthlessness or ambition. By giving people a harmless flaw to focus on, you satisfy their need to criticize you while protecting your vital organs. The reversal. Never weaponize a flaw that directly undermines your core competency. A surgeon cannot joke about having shaky hands. An accountant cannot joke about
being bad at math. The flaw must be tangential to your source of power. Law 5. Let your absence speak louder than your presence. The judgment. The market dictates that scarcity increases value. The same applies to human presence. If you are always available, always seen, and always heard, your value depreciates. You become part of the wallpaper. By withdrawing at the peak of your influence, you force people to realize what they are missing, generating an aura of mystique and heightened respect. Keys to sovereignty. Familiarity breeds contempt. When you are constantly around, people notice your human tics, your repetitive stories, your subtle insecurities. You lose your glow. The sovereign knows how to ration their presence. In a meeting, speak last and speak least. When you do speak, your words will carry the weight of an oracle. In relationships, do not be instantaneously available. Let the phone ring. Let them wonder what you are doing. When you have achieved a great victory or provided immense value, step back. Do not linger to soak up the applause. Disappear for a while. Your absence will force them to talk about you, inflating your legend. When you finally return, you will be treated like a visiting monarch rather than a familiar peer. The reversal. Absence only works if you have already established your value. If you are a nobody, disappearing will simply result in you being forgotten. You must first create a strong presence, establish your irreplaceability, and then withdraw. Furthermore, do not be absent during a crisis where your position is under direct threat. In wartime, the leader must be seen. Law 6. Never rely on the gratefulness of others. The judgment. Gratitude is an emotional state, and emotions are fleeting. If your power or security relies on someone remembering what you did for them yesterday, you are standing on quicksand. People are inherently self-interested. They will ask, "What have you done for me lately?" Anchor your relationships in mutual self-interest, not gratitude. Historical observance. Winston Churchill saved Great Britain from total annihilation during World War II. He guided the nation through its darkest hours with brilliant rhetoric and sheer iron will. Yet, the moment the war in Europe ended in 1945, the British public unceremoniously voted him out of office. His immense wartime contributions earned him historical immortality, but no political loyalty. The public's immediate self-interest, rebuilding the post-war economy, overrode their gratitude for the man who saved their lives. Keys to sovereignty. Never appeal to someone's sense of justice, fairness, or past debts if you need something critical. Instead, appeal to their greed, their fear, or their vanity. When negotiating, frame your request entirely around how it benefits them in the present or future. If you saved an executive's career a year ago and need a promotion now, do not say, "You owe me." Say, "Promoting me to this position will directly increase your division's profitability by 20%. People resent those they are indebted to. The burden of gratitude often turns into subconscious hostility. By keeping relationships rooted in mutual, ongoing benefit, you free them from guilt and secure your own position. The reversal. While you must never rely on gratitude, you must absolutely demand it when you are in power. Expect loyalty, but keep them dependent on your future favors to ensure they remain loyal. Law 7. Mirror the ego of your mark. The judgment. The deepest craving of human nature is to be understood and validated. Most people spend their lives desperate for a mirror that reflects their idealized version of themselves. If you can become that mirror, feeding their ego exactly what it starves for, they will drop all defenses and hand you the keys to their mind. Keys to sovereignty. This is the ultimate law of seduction, both romantic and professional. Stop trying to impose your personality on others. Instead, become a chameleon. Observe your target. What do they pride themselves on? If they fancy themselves a rogue intellectual, use elevated vocabulary and subtly disparage mainstream thought. If they view themselves as a rugged, no-nonsense operator, speak in blunt, practical terms. When you mirror their values, you are telling them subconsciously, you are right, your view of the world is the correct one. This is highly intoxicating. It lowers their critical thinking. They will begin to champion you, mentor you, and protect you, simply because protecting you feels like protecting an extension of themselves. The reversal. Mirroring must be subtle. If it is too obvious, it becomes mockery or sycophancy, which breeds disgust. You must mirror the essence of their ego, not blindly copy their exact mannerisms. Part 2. The dynamics of the court. Law 8. Create a vacuum and let others rush in to fill it. The judgment. When power is up for grabs, the fool rushes in, exposing his ambition and making himself a target. The sovereign steps back, creating a vacuum. By allowing others to fight for the center stage, they exhaust each other, expose their weaknesses, and alienate the masses. When the dust settles, you step in not as a conqueror, but as the reluctant savior. Historical observance. In 27 BC, after years of brutal civil war and the assassination of Julius Caesar, his adopted son Octavian found himself as the sole military power in Rome. But Octavian knew that acting like a dictator would invite the same knives that killed his father. In a breathtaking piece of political theater, Octavian walked into the Roman Senate and shocked the world by announcing he was resigning all his powers and returning control of the Republic to the Senate. He created a massive, terrifying vacuum. The Senate, realizing that without Octavian's unified command, Rome would instantly plunge back into chaotic, bloody civil war, panicked. They literally begged him to stay. They thrust unprecedented powers upon him, officially naming him Augustus, the revered one, and effectively making him the first Roman emperor. By stepping back and threatening a vacuum, Octavian forced the people to enthusiastically grant him the absolute dictatorship he could never have taken by force alone. Keys to sovereignty. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so does human society. When a leader steps down or a crisis occurs, panic sets in. The immediate instinct of the ambitious is to assert control and shout the loudest. Resist this desperate urge. Let the overambitious colleagues scramble for the boss's favor. Let the loudmouths dominate the chaotic meeting. As they fight, observe. You will learn exactly who is allied with whom, what their pressure points are, and how competent they actually are. Usually, the first to rush into a power vacuum make fatal mistakes due to haste. They promise things they cannot deliver and alienate everyone around them in their grab for the crown. Once they have failed and the situation is dire, you step forward with a calm, well-thought-out plan. Because you waited, you are perceived as objective and composed. You take power seamlessly because the collective now begs you to take it. You are not a usurper, you are a stabilizing necessity. The reversal. You must never create a vacuum if there is a highly competent, well-liked rival waiting in the wings who is perfectly positioned to fill it successfully. The vacuum strategy only works if the ensuing chaos will prove your indispensability. If you step back and someone else seamlessly takes your place and improves the situation, you have not created a vacuum, you have simply fired yourself. Law 9. Control the framing, control the outcome. The judgment. Facts are malleable, perception is reality. He who sets the parameters of a debate has already won it. Never argue within the boundaries set by your opponent. Shift the frame so that regardless of the answer, the underlying premise benefits you. Historical observance. In the late 11th century, the Byzantine Empire was crumbling under attacks from the Seljuk Turks. The Byzantine emperor begged Western Europe for military aid. However, sending thousands of knights to fight a bloody war purely to help a rival political state was a wildly unpopular idea in Europe. Pope Urban II knew that a political appeal would fail. So, at the Council of Clermont in 1095, he completely reframed the situation. He did not ask knights to go save the Byzantine Empire. He framed the expedition as a holy quest to reclaim the sacred city of Jerusalem, promising spiritual salvation and the forgiveness of all sins to anyone who fought. His rallying cry was Deus vult, God wills it. By shifting the frame from a bloody political proxy war to a glorious spiritual crusade, he triggered one of the most massive, fanatic military mobilizations in history's Europe. The Crusades were born entirely out of a masterful shift in framing. Keys to sovereignty. If someone accuses you of being excessively ruthless in business, don't defend your ruthlessness. Defending it means you are fighting on their turf. Change the frame immediately. State that you are fiercely protective of your employees, your family, and your shareholders, and you will not apologize for shielding them from market predators. You have transformed a debate about your morality into a debate about your loyalty.
In negotiations, anchor the terms early. If you are selling a company, don't let them ask, "How much is it worth?" Frame it as, "How much will it cost you in lost market dominance if your biggest competitor acquires us instead?" Control the vocabulary. He who defines the words defines the world. If you are firing people, it is strategic restructuring. If you are demanding more money, you are aligning compensation with market value. Never let your enemies name the battlefield. The reversal. While framing is powerful, it cannot blatantly contradict undeniable physical reality. If your company is bankrupt and the building is literally on fire, framing it as a warming opportunity will make you look criminally insane. Framing works on ambiguous situations, subjective value, and future projections. It does not work on raw, undeniable physical facts. Law 10. Provide the illusion of choice. The judgment. People despise feeling coerced. If you give someone an ultimatum, their ego will force them to rebel, even against their own best interests. Instead, give them options. Construct the choices so that whichever path they take, it leads exactly to the destination you desire. You gain what you want, and they feel the empowering thrill of having chosen it. Historical observance. During the late 19th century, as the British Empire expanded its grip over India, it realized that managing a massive subcontinent entirely by force was too expensive and prone to rebellion. They employed a brilliant strategy of the illusion of choice. The British allowed hundreds of local Indian princes, Maharajas, to keep their thrones, their palaces, and their titles. The British presented these princes with a choice. Option A was to rebel against the British crown, which would result in immediate military crushing, loss of their wealth, and exile. Option B was to freely choose to sign treaties of alliance with the British, allowing the princes to retain their luxurious lifestyle, collect taxes, and maintain the illusion of absolute local sovereignty, provided they followed British foreign policy and paid tribute. Naturally, the vast majority of Maharajas chose option B. they felt they had negotiated their survival and retained their honor. In reality, the British Empire had turned them into highly effective, self-funding middle managers who kept the local populations in check on behalf of the crown. Keys to sovereignty. Henry Kissinger was a master of this in the political realm. When dealing with President Richard Nixon, Kissinger would frequently present three policy options. Option A was overly aggressive, politically suicidal, and dangerous. Option C was weak, passive, and embarrassing. Option B was exactly what Kissinger wanted to do all along. Nixon, feeling like the decisive commander-in-chief, would almost always analyze the three and confidently choose option B. When assigning a task to a stubborn colleague, don't say, "Do this." Say, "We can handle it via method X, which is tedious, bureaucratic, and requires them to do more work, or method Y, the streamlined way you actually want it done." They will choose method Y with enthusiasm, believing it was their brilliant escape from method X. They get their autonomy, you get your outcome. The reversal. If you are dealing with a truly chaotic, hyper-intelligent adversary, providing options can backfire because they might invent an option D that ruins your framework. In these cases, you must restrict their movements entirely and force a single path, removing all illusions of autonomy. Law 12. Isolate the alpha to scatter the pack. The judgment. Groups do not act with a collective mind. They act according to the will of a handful of dominant personalities. When you face an organized resistance, trying to negotiate with or defeat the entire group is a fool's errand. You must identify the alpha, the linchpin holding the collective together, and remove them. Cut the head off the snake, and the body will thrash blindly before dying. Historical observance. In 1532, Spanish conquistador Francisco Pizarro arrived in the heart of the Inca Empire with merely 168 men. Facing him was the Inca Emperor Atahualpa, backed by an elite, battle-hardened army of 80,000 warriors. By all conventional logic, Pizarro was doomed to annihilation. However, Pizarro understood the architecture of Inca power. Atahualpa was not just a king, he was considered a living god. The entire social, military, and spiritual structure of the empire rested singularly on his physical presence. Pizarro arranged a peaceful meeting in the city square of Cajamarca. When Atahualpa arrived, carried on a magnificent litter, the Spanish launched a surprise ambush. They did not try to fight the 80,000 warriors. They entirely ignored the army and drove straight for the litter. The moment Pizarro physically captured Atahualpa, the Inca army froze. Without their god king to give orders, 80,000 men were paralyzed by psychological shock. Pizarro, with fewer than 200 men, effectively conquered an empire of millions simply by isolating the absolute center of gravity. Keys to sovereignty. In any department, social circle, or opposing faction, there is always an alpha. They are not always the loudest, nor do they always hold the official title of boss. The true alpha is the person whose reaction the rest of the group checks before making a decision. If you wish to dismantle a hostile coalition, do not waste energy attacking the followers. The followers only draw their courage from the alpha. Isolate this leader. You can do this by physically separating them, by promoting them to a different department, socially isolating them, by spreading rumors that breed mistrust between the alpha and the followers, or financially crushing them. The moment the alpha is neutralized or discredited, the followers will panic. They will scatter, argue amongst themselves, and inevitably seek a new strong leader to attach to. That is when you step in and absorb the remnants. The reversal. If the alpha is incompetent and making disastrous decisions that benefit you, do everything in your power to keep them in place. An incompetent alpha acts as an anchor on their own team. If you destroy them, the group might replace them with someone much more dangerous. Law 11. Trade in the currency of secrets. The judgment. Information is the blood that courses through the veins of power. He who knows the most controls the most. A secret is a piece of localized leverage. By systematically collecting the hidden truths, anxieties, and transgressions of those around you, you build an invisible arsenal. Guard your own secrets with your life and aggressively harvest the secrets of others. J. Edgar Hoover ran the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, for nearly half a century, serving under 8 different U.S. presidents. Presidents came and went, but Hoover remained untouchable. His power did not stem from his official title, but from his infamous secret files. Hoover meticulously collected compromising information on politicians, celebrities, civil rights leaders, and even the presidents themselves. He knew about John F. Kennedy's extramarital affairs. He knew about the hidden financial dealings of powerful senators. He rarely blackmailed anyone outright. He didn't have to. He would simply arrange a private meeting and casually mention a detail that proved he knew their darkest secret. The implicit threat was enough. The most powerful men in the world feared Hoover, and because of this, no president dared fire him. He ruled from the shadows through the monopolization of secrets. Keys to sovereignty. People naturally want to confess. The burden of a secret is psychologically heavy, and humans have an intense urge to unburden themselves to a sympathetic ear. To harvest secrets, you must play the role of the non-judgmental confessor. Be warm, empathetic, and occasionally offer a minor secret of your own to build false intimacy. Once they feel safe, they will spill everything. Listen more than you speak. Watch for what people vehemently deny or avoid discussing. The loudest deflections often hide the deepest insecurities. Once you have the secret, do not use it immediately. A secret deployed is a weapon spent. A secret kept hidden is an ever-present sword dangling over your opponent's head. The fear of exposure is vastly more powerful than the exposure itself. The reversal. If you hold a massively explosive secret, you might become a target. If an adversary knows you possess information that could ruin them and they believe you might use it, they may move to destroy you preemptively. If you hold a lethal secret, you must ensure your opponent knows that your destruction will trigger its automatic release.
Law 13. Retreat is not defeat. It is repositioning. The judgment ego demands that you stand your ground and fight every battle to the bitter end. Strategy demands that you survive. When faced with an overwhelming force or a losing position, pride is a luxury you cannot afford. Retreating allows you to preserve your resources, buy time, and force the enemy to overextend into unfamiliar territory. Historical observance. During the French invasion of Russia in 1812, Napoleon Bonaparte entered with the Grande Armée, a monstrous force of over 600,000 men. The Russian commander, Mikhail Kutuzov, knew his army would be pulverized in a direct, decisive confrontation. Despite intense political pressure to stand and defend the motherland, Kutuzov chose a deeply unpopular strategy. He retreated. He retreated hundreds of miles, burning crops and destroying shelter along the way, the famous scorched earth policy. Napoleon chased him, desperate for the glorious, decisive battle that would end the war. Kutuzov even abandoned Moscow, allowing Napoleon to capture a burning, empty city. Napoleon had won the territory, but his army was now stretched unimaginably thin, starving and freezing as the brutal Russian winter set in. When Napoleon was finally forced to retreat from Moscow, Kutuzov's forces, having preserved their strength, picked off the freezing, starving French army piece by piece. Only about 100,000 of Napoleon's men survived. Kutuzov conquered the greatest military genius of the age simply by walking backward. Keys to sovereignty. In corporate warfare, social disputes, or legal battles, we are conditioned to view surrender as weakness. The sovereign views surrender as a tactical pause. If an aggressive rival is launching a massive campaign against you and they have the momentum, do not meet them head-on. Yield. Let them take the minor territory. Apologize if necessary. Retreating lulls your opponent into a false sense of absolute victory. They will become arrogant, lazy, and overextended.
While they celebrate, you are in the shadows, analyzing their new position, gathering resources, and identifying the structural weaknesses they created by expanding so quickly. You strike only when their momentum has stalled and their guard is down. The reversal. Do not retreat so far that you lose your base of power entirely. A retreat must be strategic and controlled. If you continually run from every conflict, you will be branded a coward and lose the respect of your allies. You must retreat with a specific counterattack point in mind. Law 14. Let them win the argument so you can win the war. The judgment. Arguing is an ego-driven attempt to prove intellectual superiority. It is entirely counterproductive. When you argue with someone, you force them to dig their heels in and defend their position, turning a minor disagreement into a matter of personal identity. The sovereign does not care about being right in conversation. The sovereign cares about achieving the desired outcome in reality. Keys to sovereignty. Benjamin Franklin learned early in his career that his brilliant, argumentative nature was making him deeply unpopular and blocking his political ambitions. He adopted a new rule. He would never directly contradict anyone, nor use words that indicated rigid certainty, like certainly or undoubtedly. Instead, he used phrases like, "I conceive," or "it appears to me at present." If someone proposed a terrible idea, Franklin would first agree with its merits, validating the person's intelligence. Only then would he gently introduce new information that naturally led the person to abandon their own idea in favor of Franklin's. He won the war of policy by deliberately losing the superficial arguments of the ego. When dealing with a stubborn manager or a hostile client, never say, "You are wrong." Say, "You make an excellent point, and I completely see where you're coming from. How do you think we should handle," insert the glaring flaw in their plan. Let them have the verbal victory. Let them feel smart. While they are busy preening their feathers, you quietly maneuver the physical assets to secure your ultimate objective. Words are cheap. Results are unarguable. The reversal. In public forums where an audience is judging your strength, conceding an argument to a bully can look like submission. In high-stakes public debates, you must sometimes destroy your opponent's argument to signal dominance to the observing crowd. But in private, one-on-one negotiations, arguing is a poison. Part 3. The sustenance of sovereignty. Law 15. Strike only when the echo will be deafening. The judgment. A quiet victory is a wasted victory. When you must take action against an enemy or assert your dominance, the physical result is only half the equation. The psychological impact, the echo, is what ensures long-term power. Your actions must be theatrical, disproportionate, and designed to send a chilling message to anyone else who might dare challenge you in the future. Historical observance. In the 15th century, Vlad the Impaler, Vlad III Dracula, was tasked with defending Wallachia against the Ottoman Empire, a superpower with an army vastly outnumbering his own. When Sultan Mehmed II marched on Vlad's capital with a massive force, he expected a conventional siege. Instead, as the Ottoman army approached the capital of Targovishte, they encountered a forest of 20,000 impaled corpses. Vlad had executed every prisoner of war and criminal, displaying them in a grotesque, miles-long macabre theater. The sheer psychological horror of the forest of the impaled broke the morale of the Ottoman troops. Even the battle-hardened Sultan, sickened and deeply unsettled by a man capable of such terrifying, theatrical cruelty, turned his army around and retreated. Vlad did not defeat the Ottomans with superior tactics, he defeated them with an echo of terror. Keys to sovereignty. When you decide to punish a transgression, do not do it privately or in half measures. The goal is not just to neutralize the immediate threat, but to make an example that reverberates through your organization or social circle. If an employee commits an act of disloyalty, firing them privately is a missed opportunity. Terminating them publicly, abruptly, and with a clear articulation of why their betrayal was unforgivable turns their demise into a monument to your boundaries. The human mind is deeply affected by spectacle. A dramatic, overwhelming strike burns itself into the memory of observers. It establishes a psychological perimeter around you. People will think twice before crossing you, not because they know exactly what you'll do, but because they remember the legendary echo of what you did to the last person. The reversal. If your power is fragile, a massive theatrical strike can make you look tyrannical and incite a unified rebellion against you. Theatrical strikes are for solidifying existing power, not building it from scratch. Furthermore, if you need deniability, a quiet, untraceable sabotage is vastly superior to a loud execution. Law 16. Never assume malice when incompetence suffices, but punish both. The judgment. Paranoia is a disease of the insecure leader. Assuming every mistake is a deliberate plot against you will exhaust your mind and alienate your allies. However, excessive forgiveness of incompetence is equally fatal. The sovereign recognizes that while a subordinate may not hate them, their stupidity can destroy the empire as thoroughly as a traitor's dagger. Understand the difference, but be ruthless with the standard. Hanlon's razor dictates, never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity. When a partner fails to deliver or a subordinate loses a key account, your first reaction should not be anger at their betrayal. It should be an objective, cold analysis of their capability. Malice requires intent. It is a direct threat that must be amputated immediately. Incompetence is a failure of mechanics. However, many modern leaders fall into the trap of endless empathy, giving incompetent people fifth and sixth chances because they mean well. The sovereign knows that meaning well does not pay the bills, win wars, or secure power. A well-meaning fool will accidentally burn down your citadel while trying to light a candle for you. If someone makes a mistake out of ignorance, educate them once. If they make it twice, demote them. If they make it a third time, remove them entirely. You are building an empire, not running a rehabilitation center for the mediocre. The reversal. There is a specific utility in keeping an incompetent person around. They make excellent scapegoats. If you are about to execute a highly risky maneuver, assign the most visible, volatile parts of the plan to an incompetent subordinate. If the plan succeeds, you claim the architectural glory. If the plan explodes, the incompetent subordinate's well-known incompetence provides you with the perfect, believable sacrificial lamb to absorb the blame. Law 17. Sever the root. Do not just trim the branches. The judgment. A defeated enemy who is allowed to survive and lick their wounds is the most dangerous entity on earth. They will not feel gratitude for your mercy. They will fester with a lifelong obsession for revenge. When you must destroy an opponent, you must destroy them entirely, financially, socially, and psychologically. Leave them nothing with which to rebuild. Historical observance. Empress Wu Zetian, the only female monarch in the history of China, understood this law with terrifying clarity. When she rose to power in the 7th century, she faced immense opposition from the established aristocratic families and rival concubines. Wu Zetian did not merely exile her enemies or strip them of their titles. When she targeted a rival, she eradicated their entire bloodline. She executed the rival, their children, their extended family, and any political allies associated with them. By literally severing the ancestral roots of her enemies, she ensured that no heir could ever rise up a generation later seeking vengeance. Through this absolute, uncompromising ruthlessness, she stabilized her reign and ruled over a highly prosperous, relatively peaceful golden age of the Tang dynasty. Keys to sovereignty. Human nature is deeply vindictive. If you engage in a brutal corporate takeover and fire the old CEO, but leave his loyal lieutenants in middle management positions, you have seeded your own destruction. They will quietly sabotage you from within out of loyalty to the old regime. If you are going to ruin someone, ruin them completely. This does not mean physical violence. In the modern world, it means dismantling their infrastructure. If you defeat a rival in business, buy out their suppliers, hire away their top talent, discredit their reputation in the industry so deeply that no one will lend them capital. You must push them past the point of anger into the realm of absolute despair and resignation. When an enemy realizes that fighting you means utter, irreversible annihilation, only then will they truly submit. The reversal. If destroying an enemy completely would cause too much collateral damage to your own reputation or resources, you must instead co-opt them. Keep them close, shower them with superficial honors, and integrate them so deeply into your own system that their survival becomes entirely dependent on your success. You turn a hungry wolf into a well-fed guard dog. Law 18. Evolve faster than their perception of you. The judgment. The moment the world successfully categorizes you, they can dismiss you. People are desperate to put you in a box because it makes you safe and predictable to them. If you become a static archetype, the aggressive closer, the quiet thinker, the rebel, you become a target. You must shed your skins continuously. Evolve and mutate your persona and tactics so rapidly that your enemies are always fighting the ghost of who you used to be. Historical observance. Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire using the sheer discipline and brutal phalanx tactics of his Macedonian army. He was hailed as a brilliant Hellenic king. However, once he conquered Persia, he realized that ruling the vast, diverse Eastern Empire with rigid Greek customs would inevitably lead to rebellion. Instead of forcing his culture upon the conquered, Alexander evolved. He began wearing traditional Persian royal robes. He adopted Persian court etiquette, including the practice of proskinesis, bowing and kissing the hand of the ruler. He took a Persian wife, Roxana. His Macedonian generals were appalled, viewing him as having betrayed his roots. But Alexander was not being sentimental. He was being highly strategic. By evolving his persona to match the expectations of the Persian people, he legitimized his rule in their eyes. He transformed from a foreign conqueror to a legitimate Persian king of kings. His ability to mutate his identity faster than his enemies could categorize him allowed him to govern an empire of unprecedented size. Never let your brand become a cage. If you are known for your ruthless efficiency, people will approach you with defensive shields raised. So, pivot. Spend 6 months cultivating an image of deep, philosophical empathy. Your enemies, who have prepared for a knife fight, will be completely disoriented when you offer them tea and therapy. The sovereign is formless. Like water, you must adopt the shape of whatever vessel you are poured into, while maintaining the power to drown anyone who steps out of line. Read constantly, acquire new skills outside of your primary domain, and deliberately associate with people from vastly different backgrounds. When your competitors finally figure out your last move, you should already be playing a different game. The reversal. There is a danger in evolving too quickly. You can alienate your core base of support who relied on your old identity. When you change your form, you must do so seamlessly, maintaining the underlying core of your power so that your allies do not abandon you in confusion. Law 19. Build a citadel of information. The judgment. Physical walls can be breached by artillery. Financial walls can be breached by inflation and market crashes. The only impenetrable fortress in the modern world is a citadel of exclusive information. You must cultivate a network of eyes and ears that spans every level of the hierarchy, ensuring you are warned of incoming storms before the sky even begins to darken. In 1815, the fate of Europe hung in the balance at the Battle of Waterloo. If Napoleon Bonaparte won, he would reclaim his empire. If the British-led coalition under the Duke of Wellington won, Napoleon would be destroyed forever. In London, the stock market was in a state of hyper-anxiety. Traders knew whoever got the news first would make a fortune. Nathan Mayer Rothschild, head of the London branch of the Rothschild banking family, had spent years building an unparalleled private intelligence network of carrier pigeons, fast boats, and secret couriers across Europe. Rothschild received news of Wellington's victory a full day before the official government couriers arrived in London. Armed with this exclusive information, Rothschild went to the stock exchange. He deliberately started selling his bonds, tricking the market into thinking Napoleon had won. Panic ensued, and prices crashed to rock bottom. Once the market was gutted, Rothschild secretly bought everything through his agents at a fraction of the cost. When the official news of victory finally broke, prices skyrocketed, and Rothschild multiplied his family's wealth to a level of unimaginable global supremacy. He built an empire on a 24-hour information advantage. Keys to sovereignty. Never rely on official channels for your news. The official memo, the HR announcement, the press release, these are sanitized fictions designed to manage your perception. You need raw, unfiltered data. Cultivate relationships with the invisible people in your organization, the administrative assistants, the IT technicians, the janitors, the interns. These people handle the raw data, see the private calendars, and hear the hushed conversations. Treat them with immense respect, tip them well, and listen to them. While the executives are boasting in the boardroom, the assistants know exactly who is actually about to be fired. When you control the flow of information, you control reality. You know when to buy, when to sell, when to attack, and when to hide. Hoarding too much raw data can lead to analysis paralysis. Information is only valuable if it is curated, accurate, and actionable. Furthermore, if you are known as the central hub of gossip, people will stop trusting you with their serious secrets. You must gather information like a ghost, leaving no fingerprints on the data you consume. Law 20. Disperse your power to keep it. The judgment. Concentrated power is fragile power. If all your wealth is in one bank, if all your political clout rests on one alliance, or if your business relies on a single massive client, you are constantly one mistake away from annihilation. The sovereign secures their empire by decentralizing it. Spin webs, not pillars. Historical observance. The Medici family of Florence rose from obscurity to become the wealthiest and most powerful family in 15th century Europe, producing 4 popes and 2 queens of France. Their power stemmed from the Medici Bank. Unlike previous massive banking institutions, such as the Bardi and Peruzzi families, which centralized all their operations into one massive headquarters, Giovanni di Bici de' Medici used a brilliantly innovative structure, the holding company. He dispersed his power. He opened branches in Rome, Venice, Naples, and London, but he did not make them direct subsidiaries. Each branch was legally a separate partnership, managed by a junior partner who shared in the profits and the risks. Because the power was dispersed, a catastrophic failure in one region could not bring down the entire family. When the London branch collapsed due to the Wars of the Roses, the Medici Bank in Florence barely felt the tremor. This decentralized, web-like structure made them virtually indestructible for centuries. Keys to sovereignty. Do not allow yourself a single point of failure. If you are an entrepreneur, diversify your income streams so that the loss of your biggest client is a minor annoyance, not a bankruptcy event. If you are a politician or corporate climber, do not tie your entire career to a single mentor. Mentors fall out of favor, and when they do, their protégés are purged with them. When you build a team or an organization, empower regional managers or lieutenants with enough autonomy to handle local crises without needing your direct input. This prevents a bottleneck at the top and ensures the machine keeps running even if you are incapacitated or focused elsewhere. A hydra cannot be killed by severing one head. You must make your empire impossible to be decapitated.
The reversal. Dispersing your power requires you to trust your lieutenants. If you decentralize authority to incompetent or disloyal subordinates, you have simply handed them the tools to build their own rival empires. Dispersal of execution must always be paired with centralized, ruthless monitoring of results. Law 21. Know the exact moment to walk away. The judgment. The most dangerous moment in any victory is the moment after you win. Drunk on success, the ego pushes you to grab for more, overextending your resources and blinding you to new dangers. True power is not just knowing how to conquer, it is knowing when to stop, pack up the spoils, and walk away before the tide turns. Historical observance. Lucius Cornelius Sulla was one of the most brilliant and terrifying men in the history of the Roman Republic. In 82 BC, after winning a brutal civil war, Sulla marched his army into Rome and had himself declared dictator for life. He possessed absolute, unmitigated power. He purged the city of his enemies, executing thousands of political rivals without trial, and completely rewrote the Roman constitution to his liking. He was the most powerful man in the known world, and half the Senate wanted him dead. Then, in 79 BC, at the absolute height of his terror and supremacy, Sulla did the unthinkable. He resigned, he disbanded his legions, walked into the forum as a private citizen, and dared anyone to challenge him. Stunned by the psychological whiplash, no one did. Sulla retired to his country estate, spent his final years writing his memoirs, drinking wine, and enjoying the company of actors and musicians. He died peacefully in his bed. He understood that holding absolute power indefinitely is exhausting and eventually fatal. By walking away at the zenith, he secured his life, his wealth, and his legacy. Keys to sovereignty. In gambling, the house always wins eventually because the gambler refuses to leave the table when they are up. They let greed override strategy. If you have just won a massive concession in a negotiation, stop talking, shake hands, sign the paper, and leave the room. The more you linger, the more opportunity your opponent has to rethink the deal or feel resentful. If you have achieved the peak position in your industry and there is nowhere left to climb, do not stick around to slowly rot and be deposed by younger, hungrier rivals. Engineer a graceful, highly profitable exit, move to a new industry, become an investor, or retire to the shadows. The sovereign controls the final act. If you do not write the ending to your own story, your enemies will write it for you. The reversal. There is no reversal to this law. Clinging to power past your expiration date leads only to humiliation, loss, and destruction. Knowing when to fold your hand is the ultimate, non-negotiable test of self-mastery. Part 4. The Shadows of Sovereignty. Law 22. Cultivate a scapegoat before the crisis hits. The judgment. The masses demand blood when things go wrong. If you are the singular face of a project, a company, or a movement, their wrath will naturally gravitate toward you when failure inevitably occurs. You must never stand naked in the storm of public or corporate outrage. Cultivate a loyal but highly visible lieutenant who is positioned to absorb the blame. By sacrificing the scapegoat, you appease the mob and preserve your own crown. Historical observance. In the early 15th century, Cesare Borgia conquered the chaotic, lawless region of the Romagna in Italy. To establish order, he needed to implement brutal, uncompromising laws and mass executions. However, Borgia knew that directly committing these atrocities would make the people hate him forever. He appointed a cruel, efficient lieutenant named Ramiro de Orco to rule the region with an iron hand. De Orco terrified the populace, executed the warlords, and established peace through absolute terror. Once the region was pacified, the people were seething with hatred for De Orco. Borgia saw his opportunity to win the love of the people and distance himself from the brutality that he had secretly ordered. He had De Orco arrested. One morning, the people of the Romagna awoke to find De Orco's body sliced in two, displayed in the public square with a bloody knife beside it. The people were simultaneously satisfied, relieved, and deeply terrified of Borgia. Borgia achieved peace, eliminated the resentment against his own name, and cemented his rule. Keys to sovereignty. A scapegoat is not a victim chosen at random. A scapegoat is a structural necessity. When launching a risky initiative, ensure there is a co-director, a prominent consultant, or an eager junior partner taking center stage on the most volatile elements. Allow them the spotlight and the credit while things are going well. If the initiative collapses, their prominent position makes them the logical recipient of the fallout. You step in not as the architect of the failure, but as the outraged executive stepping in to clean up the mess.
You fire the scapegoat with great fanfare, showing decisive leadership and safely insulating your own reputation. The reversal: if you choose a scapegoat who is too competent, too popular, or possesses too much leverage over you, they may turn the tables and pin the blame back on you. The ideal scapegoat must be ambitious but politically isolated. Law 23. Exhaust your enemies with bureaucracy and delay. The judgment: aggression relies on momentum. When an opponent attacks you with righteous fury or legal threats, meeting them head-on often validates their anger and sparks a war. Instead, weaponize time. Bog them down in endless red tape, minor procedural errors, and administrative reviews. By drowning their fiery momentum in a swamp of boring, frustrating delays, you drain their emotional energy until they give up out of sheer exhaustion. Historical observance: in 217 BC, Hannibal, the brilliant Carthaginian general, had invaded Italy and was annihilating Roman armies in open combat. The Roman Republic was in a state of absolute panic. They elected Quintus Fabius Maximus as dictator to save the city. Instead of marching out to fight the seemingly invincible Hannibal, Fabius did the unthinkable. He refused to engage. He shadowed Hannibal's army, staying on high ground where cavalry couldn't reach him. He cut off supply lines, engaged in minor skirmishes, and constantly retreated. The Roman public hated it, calling him a coward, but Fabius knew that Hannibal was far from home, relying on quick, decisive victories to feed his troops and rally Italian allies. By dragging the war out into a tedious, endless logistical nightmare, Fabius starved the Carthaginian army of its momentum and resources. The Fabian strategy of intentional delay and avoidance saved Rome from destruction. Keys to sovereignty: never underestimate the destructive power of boredom and frustration. If a rival department is trying to aggressively take over your project, do not yell or fight. Smile, agree in principle, and then demand a comprehensive cross-departmental impact study. Schedule endless committee meetings to discuss the nuances of the transition. Accidentally lose the paperwork. Require approvals from stakeholders who are notoriously difficult to reach. The aggressor runs on adrenaline. When you force them to deal with the soul-crushing machinery of bureaucracy, their adrenaline turns to toxic stress. They will eventually realize that fighting you is simply not worth the massive expenditure of time, and they will redirect their aggression toward an easier target. The reversal: this law is fatal if you are the one who needs immediate action. Bureaucracy is a shield, not a sword. Do not delay if the crisis requires instant, decisive movement to secure your survival. Law 24. Feign harmlessness to discover hidden threats. The judgment: intelligence is intimidating. When people perceive you as sharp, ambitious, and highly capable, they raise their defenses and hide their true motives. If you occasionally wear the mask of the fool, playing slightly dull, overly naive, or innocuously clumsy, people will drop their guard. They will speak freely around you, revealing their hidden agendas, because they do not believe you possess the capacity to use the information against them. In ancient Rome, the imperial family was a nest of vipers, where anyone showing ambition was quickly assassinated. Claudius, the nephew of Emperor Tiberius, survived this bloody era by playing the fool. He drolled, he stuttered, he limped, and he acted cowardly. His family viewed him as an embarrassing half-wit, entirely unworthy of power. Because he was harmless, he was allowed to live. More importantly, politicians, senators, and rival family members openly discussed their plots and treasons in front of him, assuming he was too stupid to understand. When the terrifying Emperor Caligula was assassinated by his own guards, the Praetorian Guard found Claudius hiding behind a curtain. Realizing they needed a puppet emperor to maintain their own power, they crowned the idiot. Once on the throne, Claudius dropped the act. He ruled intelligently, expanded the empire, and systematically executed those who had plotted against him for years, using the very secrets they had foolishly revealed in his presence.
Keys to sovereignty. The ego is the enemy of espionage. Most people are desperate to prove how smart they are in every conversation, correcting others and showing off their knowledge. The sovereign suppresses this urge. When negotiating, pretend to be slightly confused by the numbers. Your opponent, sensing an easy mark, will become overconfident and may reveal their actual bottom line or the weaknesses in their position. At corporate parties, play the slightly tipsy, jovial simpleton. People love to feel superior, and they will reward your feigned ignorance with their most dangerous gossip. The reversal. If you play the fool too well and for too long, you risk permanently damaging your reputation. You may be passed over for promotions or entirely sidelined. The mask of harmlessness must be used tactically and removed the moment you need to strike. Law 25. Master the art of the vague promise. The judgment. Specific commitments are chains that bind you to a timeline and a deliverable. Vagueness is the ultimate tool of flexibility. Keep your allies hoping, keep your enemies guessing, and keep your followers moving by offering grand, emotionally resonant promises devoid of concrete details. A vague promise buys you time and loyalty while costing you absolutely nothing in the present. Historical observance. Queen Elizabeth I of England reigned during a time when her nation was constantly threatened by the superpowers of France and Spain. For decades, the greatest diplomatic weapon she wielded was the promise of her marriage. Kings and princes from across Europe vied for her hand. Elizabeth never said no. Doing so would have insulted them and sparked immediate war. Instead, she mastered the vague promise. She sent encouraging letters, accepted extravagant gifts, and engaged in endless, drawn-out negotiations about dowries and religious concessions. She kept Spain hoping for years. She kept France dangling for a decade. By constantly promising a marriage that was always just over the horizon, she prevented invasions, secured alliances, and maintained absolute control over her realm. She died the Virgin Queen, having never fulfilled a single one of those promises. Keys to sovereignty. In business, let's explore synergies in Q3 is vastly superior to I will sign a contract for $50,000 on September 1st. The former creates a sense of collaborative hope and keeps the relationship warm. The latter traps you in a legal corner. Politicians build entire careers on vague promises, hope, change, making the country great. These words mean entirely different things to different people, allowing the masses to project their own desires onto the leader. When you must promise something to secure cooperation, speak in terms of shared vision and future potential, not spreadsheets and deadlines. The reversal. Eventually, a bill comes due. If you rely entirely on vague promises and never deliver any tangible results, people will realize they are chasing a mirage. You must occasionally grant small, specific concessions to maintain the illusion that the grand, vague promise is still achievable. Law 26. Play the courtier, hide the assassin. The judgment. Overt aggression is a sign of unsophistication. The most dangerous people in any organization are rarely the loud, cable-pounding tyrants. They are the exceedingly polite, flawlessly agreeable courtiers. By mastering the art of extreme politeness, deference to authority, and social grace, you become invisible. The velvet glove must always cover the iron fist until the exact moment of impact. Charles Maurice Talleyrand was a master diplomat who accomplished an impossible feat. He survived and thrived during the French Revolution, the Reign of Terror, the rule of Napoleon Bonaparte, and the restoration of the Bourbon monarchy. While heads were rolling by the thousands, Talleyrand remained in power. His secret was his absolute mastery of the courtier's mask. He was endlessly polite, flawlessly dressed, and never raised his voice. He made himself agreeable to whoever held the guillotine. But beneath this harmless, aristocratic exterior was a ruthless survivor. When Napoleon's power began to wane, Talleyrand, still smiling, still bowing, quietly opened back-channel negotiations with the enemy allies, ensuring his own survival while orchestrating the emperor's downfall. He murdered his enemies with perfect etiquette. Keys to sovereignty.
In the modern corporate court, the courtier survives by mastering the unwritten rules of ego. Never openly contradict a superior in a meeting. Agree with their premise, then gently steer them toward your conclusion. Always remember names, send thank you notes, and feign deep interest in the trivial hobbies of those above you. This performative politeness acts as a cloaking device. When people think of you, they think pleasant, helpful, and loyal. Because your exterior is so smooth and accommodating, no one suspects that you are quietly maneuvering to replace them or dismantle their departments. When you finally execute your strike, the victim won't even realize you're holding the knife until it's already done. The reversal. If your courtier act is too sycophantic or obvious, you will be viewed as a slimy flatterer, which invites disgust rather than trust. Your politeness must appear dignified and professional, not desperate. Law 27. Turn their paranoia into a weapon. The judgment. Fear is the most potent and destructive human emotion. An enemy who is terrified of shadows will waste their energy swinging at the air, exhausting their resources and alienating their own allies. You do not need to launch a massive attack to destroy an opponent. You only need to plant a single seed of doubt in their mind. Nurture their paranoia, and they will destroy themselves from the inside out. During World War II, prior to the D-Day invasion at Normandy, the Allies needed to convince Adolf Hitler that the attack was coming somewhere else, specifically Pas-de-Calais. They launched Operation Fortitude, a masterclass in weaponized paranoia. The Allies didn't just leak false documents, they built an entire ghost army out of inflatable tanks, fake wooden airplanes, and endless, meaningless radio chatter that they knew the Germans were intercepting. They put General George S. Patton, the commander the Germans feared most, in charge of this phantom force. Hitler's paranoia did the rest. Convinced that the real attack was coming from this ghost army, he kept his best panzer divisions stationed at Calais even weeks after the actual invasion at Normandy had begun. He was fighting a hallucination, paralyzed by the fear of what the Allies might do. Keys to sovereignty. To weaponize paranoia, use the accidental leak. Leave a slightly ambiguous document on the copy machine. Let a known gossip overhear half of a conversation regarding a major restructuring. Send an encrypted-looking but ultimately meaningless email to a rival. Human beings possess a fatal flaw, apophenia, the tendency to perceive meaningful connections between unrelated things. If an insecure boss sees you having coffee with a higher-level executive and later that day receives a cryptic email from HR, their paranoid brain will instantly connect the two events, assuming you are plotting against them. They will act irrationally, lash out, and ultimately self-destruct, all without you ever having to lift a finger. The reversal. Do not use paranoia on an opponent who possesses overwhelming power and a trigger-happy disposition. If you make a paranoid tyrant believe you are plotting against them, their fear will not paralyze them, it will cause them to preemptively execute you. Law 28. Embody the zeitgeist, then direct it. The judgment. Power does not exist in a vacuum. It exists in the context of the era. The masses are constantly swirling with unspoken anxieties, collective desires, and shared frustrations. The sovereign does not fight the current of the culture. They identify the zeitgeist, the spirit of the times, embody it perfectly, and then ride the wave to ultimate authority. In the 15th century, France was fractured, exhausted by the 100 Years' War, and desperate for divine intervention. The French people were quietly starved for a miracle. Joan of Arc, a peasant girl, did not rise to power through military rank or noble birth. She rose because she perfectly embodied the exact zeitgeist of the era. She claimed to have divine visions, wore white armor, and spoke with pure, uncorrupted, fanatic religious zeal. She was the living incarnation of the righteous, divine retribution that the French populace had been secretly praying for. Because she channeled the collective emotion of an entire nation, seasoned generals and cynical politicians fell in line behind her. She didn't just lead an army, she directed the psychological momentum of an entire era. Keys to sovereignty. Look past the news cycle and observe the deeper emotional currents of your industry or society. Are people currently driven by fear of technological replacement? Are they exhausted by corporate greed and craving authenticity? Are they nostalgic for a more disciplined past? Whatever the underlying unspoken emotion is, tailor your persona to be the living answer to it. If an industry is terrified of chaos, become the absolute embodiment of rigid, reliable order. If a culture is feeling oppressed by tradition, become the flamboyant, rule-breaking rebel. By speaking the words that the masses are thinking but are too afraid to say, you tap into a reservoir of collective power. They will elevate you because they see you as their own avatar.
The reversal. The zeitgeist is fickle. The spirit of the times shifts rapidly. If you tie your identity too rigidly to a passing trend, you will be discarded the moment the culture evolves. You must embody the current wave, but remain adaptable enough to catch the next one before the first crashes upon the shore. Epilogue. The sovereign's solitude. The path of the sovereign is not a path of warmth, nor is it a path of popular adoration. When you strip away the illusions of human morality, when you stop relying on hope and start relying entirely on leverage, you step into a very cold, very clear atmosphere. You will see your friends not merely as assets, with varying degrees of reliability. You will view your superiors not as leaders to be revered, but as obstacles to be navigated or utilized. You will look at society and see the strings attached to everyone's limbs, marveling at how vigorously they dance to tunes they cannot even hear. This level of psychological detachment brings immense power, but it also brings a distinct solitude. When you can read the hidden motives behind every smile and every favor, you can rarely be surprised and you can almost never be truly vulnerable. This is the price of the crown. But consider the alternative. To remain asleep is to be a pawn in someone else's game. It is to have your emotional state dictated by the whims of your boss, the manipulation of the media, and the casual cruelties of everyday life. It is to spend your life hoping that the strong will be kind to you. The sovereign trades the comforting illusions of the flock for the cold reality of the mountaintop. They accept the solitude because they know that true freedom, freedom from coercion, freedom from manipulation, freedom from the tyranny of the egos of others, is worth any price. You now possess the codex. The chessboard is set. The pieces are moving. It is time to play.